when the alien Federation saw what happens when humans drop diplomacy. My hands were shaking before I even opened the door to the council chamber. Not from fear, from the effort of keeping them still. 12 years of training told me to smile, to bow, to use the 17 polite phrases the Valyrii elders expected before any human was allowed to speak. 12 years of swallowing insults at state dinners, 12 years of apologizing for things we had not done, 12 years of being called the developing species, the emotional species, the children of the galaxy. My name is Elena Harper, and on the morning this story begins, I was the chief ambassador of Earth to the Galactic Concordat. I was 46 years old. I had spent half my career learning to be patient. I was about to forget every lesson. The message had arrived at 3:00 in the morning local station time. And GT snorts. And GT, a priority transmission from Earth Defense Command. I read it twice before my brain accepted the words, new Meridian colony, 18,000 civilians gone. A Threnic raider fleet had dropped out of slip space, burned through the colony's light defense grid, and taken everything that could be loaded onto their transport ships. Farmers, teachers, children, the colony itself had been left as a warning, its buildings emptied, its streets silent. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time staring at the transmission. And GT snorts. And GT, the Threnic hegemony had been testing us for years. Small raids on outer settlements, disputed claims on shipping lanes. Every time the Concordat had asked Earth to be patient, every time I had agreed, patience was our strategy. Patience was our proof of maturity. Patience, we had been told, would earn us a real seat at the table one day. 18,000 people. I put on my formal robes, the long gray coat with the silver trim, the circlet of office, the ceremonial gloves. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. I did not recognize the woman staring back. She looked tired. She looked old. She looked like someone who had spent 12 years being polite to people who were eating her world one bite at a time. The council chamber was already full when I arrived. 43 species representatives, each in their assigned alcove, the Valyrii elders at the top tier, their pale robes glowing faintly in the blue light. The Drenish Archon in his lower seat, nodding to me as I passed. The Corvex merchants in their raised platform, already bored, and there in the opposite alcove from mine, the Threnic delegation. Their ambassador, a tall creature named Vesk, was leaning back in his chair with the casual posture of someone who had already won. I took my seat. I placed my folder on the desk. I did not open it. Quester Ixal, the chief arbiter of the session, raised his staff and called the chamber to order. The session was about the new Meridian incident. That was the word they used, incident, as if 18,000 people had slipped on a wet floor. The Threnic ambassador spoke first. He did not stand. He spoke from his chair, his voice smooth and unbothered. He explained that New Meridian had been built in disputed space, that the human colonists had been warned, that the Threnic had acted within their rights under Concordat Article 19, which covered disputes between developing and established powers. He requested that the survivors currently being held on Threnic transport ships be formally classified as cultural exchange subjects. He used Those exact words, cultural exchange. Subjects. I watched the chamber for reaction. I watched 43 species representatives. Listen to a man explain why taking 18,000 people was legal. I watched them nod. I watched them take notes. I watched the Corvex merchants check their trade terminals. I watched the Valyrii elders exchange small, patient looks. No one was angry. No one was surprised. No one in that entire chamber thought this was unusual. That was the moment something inside me broke. Not loudly, not with shouting. It was a quiet breaking, the way an old rope finally gives up after years of holding too much weight. I sat in my alcove and I understood for the first time in 12 years what the Concordat actually was. It was not a federation. It was not a community of equals. It was a very old ecosystem, and every species in it had a role. The Valyrii were the keepers. The Corvex were the merchants. The Threnic were the predators. And humanity, the youngest species in the room, had been given the role of prey. We had been polite about it. We had smiled. We had bowed. We had believed. Because we wanted to believe that good behavior would change our role. But roles in old ecosystems do not change because the prey asks nicely. They change because the prey stops being prey. I stood up. The chamber went quiet. Quester Ixal raised his staff to remind me that I had not been recognized to speak. I ignored him. I said I was requesting an emergency recess to consult with Earth. My voice was calm. I did not raise it. Ixal looked annoyed, but recesses were a standard right of any delegation. He granted it with a small wave of his hand, the way a parent grants a small thing to a child to end an interruption. I walked out of the chamber. My heels echoed on the stone floor. I did not look back. In the corridor outside, I pulled out my personal communicator. I did not call the foreign ministry. I did not call the president. I called a man I had argued with for 12 years, a man I had publicly called dangerous, short-sighted, and a threat to galactic peace, a man who had, despite all of it, answered every one of my calls with respect. General William Carter, Supreme Commander of Earth Defense Forces. He picked up on the second ring. His voice was tired. He had already seen the New Meridian report. Elena, he said, tell me you're calling for the reason I think you are. I stood in that corridor in my formal robes with the weight of 12 years on my shoulders, and I said the words I had promised myself I would never say. William, take it off. Take the leash off all of it. There was a long silence on the line. I could hear him breathing. I could hear the faint hum of his command center in the background. I could hear very faintly the sound of a man making a decision he had been ready to make for a decade. Are you certain, Elena? He asked. Because once I move, I cannot stop. Not halfway, not at all. I thought about the Threnic ambassador in his chair. I thought about the Corvex merchants checking their terminals. I thought about Ixal's small, dismissive wave. I thought about 18,000 people on transport ships being classified as cultural exchange subjects. I am certain, I said, drop diplomacy. Drop all of it. Show them what we actually are. Understood, he said. His voice had changed. It was no longer tired. Stay in the station. Do not return to Earth. I want you in that chamber when the footage arrives. I want them looking at you when they understand. When will you move? We have already moved, Elena. We moved. The moment New Meridian went dark, I was waiting for your call. The line went quiet. I stood in that corridor for a long time staring at the communicator in my hand. 12 years, 12 years of patience, 12 years of believing. We were being integrated, and in that moment I understood that Earth had not been integrating at all. And GT snorts. And GT, Earth had been preparing quietly, patiently for this exact day. I walked back into the council chamber. I took my seat. I opened my folder. I did not look at the Threnic ambassador. I did not look at Ixal. I looked straight ahead at the blank wall of the opposite alcove, and I waited. The session resumed. Ixal began the formal process of taking the new Meridian matter under 6-month review. The Threnic ambassador allowed himself a small sound of satisfaction. The Corvix merchants returned to their terminals. None of them knew, none of them felt it yet, but somewhere in the deep dark between the stars, a fleet that the Concordat had never been allowed to see was already moving, a fleet built over 12 years of patient study, a fleet carrying weapons the Concordat had classified as too primitive to possess, a fleet commanded by a man who had waited half his life for permission to use it. I sat in that chamber, and I listened to Ixal speak, and I felt for the first time in 12 years completely calm, because I knew what was coming. And I knew that when it arrived, every species in that chamber would finally see us clearly. The session ended at 1400 hours. I returned to my quarters. I took off the formal robes. I put on something simpler. I sat by the window of my station apartment, and I watched the stars somewhere out there in a system the Threnic called home. General Carter's fleet was about to arrive, and the galaxy was about to learn something about humanity that it had spent 12 years refusing to see. The next 72 hours were the longest of my life. I did not sleep. I did not eat much. I sat in my quarters and I waited for news. I kept my communicator close. I watched the station's public feeds, the diplomatic channels, the merchant chatter. Nothing, no reports from Thranic space, no alerts, no emergency broadcast. The galaxy went on as normal, which meant General Carter was running silent. He was good at that. I had underestimated him for years. On the second day, I received a quiet visit from Archon Varen of the Drenish. He was a short, stocky creature with 6 limbs and a gentle face. He had always been kind to me in the careful way of a minor species trying not to be noticed by the larger ones. He sat in my small guest chair, folded his 4 lower limbs, and looked at me for a long time before speaking. "Ambassador Harper," he said softly, "something is wrong. I can feel it. My people can feel it. The station is too quiet." I looked at him. I had always liked Varen. He was one of the few representatives who had treated humans as equals from the beginning, even when it cost him standing with the inner powers. I considered telling him, I considered warning him, but I had my orders, and more than my orders, I had my own judgment. Varen was a friend, but he was also a diplomat, and a warning to him would become a warning to others. The new Meridian matter is heavy on all of us, I said. He studied me. His eyes were old and wise. He nodded slowly. "I came to tell you something," he said. "Whatever happens next, the Drenish we remember who raided our Border colonies 200 years ago, we remember who the Concordat refused to stop. We remember who was told to be patient. He stood. He placed one of his small hands briefly on my desk, a gesture of respect among his people. If a new wind begins to blow, he said, the Drenish will not stand against it. That is all I came to say. He left. I sat in my quiet quarters and I felt for the first time in days small warmth in my chest. We had more friends than I had realized. The Concordat had taught us that we were alone. The Concordat had lied about many things. On the morning of the third day, the news broke. It came first as a confused merchant report, a Corvex trader routing through the outer Thranic systems had sent an urgent message to his home office. Something was wrong. The Thranic patrol fleet that normally escorted trade routes was not answering hails. The trader had turned his ship around and run. Within an hour the report was everywhere on the merchant channels. By noon, the first Valerie observation post reported that the Thranic military communication network had gone silent. Completely silent. Every frequency, every protocol. The Thranic whose fleets had terrorized the outer rim for 3 centuries had simply stopped transmitting. By 1500 hours, a refugee ship arrived at a neutral station carrying Thranic civilians. Their story spread like fire. They spoke of human ships, hundreds of them appearing without warning in the Thranic home system, moving with a speed and coordination the Thranic had never seen, surrounding every military installation, every shipyard, every orbital platform, not attacking cities, not harming civilians, simply dismantling every piece of Thranic military capability with surgical precision. The Thranic government had called for a defense. The defense had failed in hours. The government had surrendered before the day was out. The council chamber called an emergency session. I was informed by a trembling aide that my presence was required. Immediately, I took my time. I put on the formal robes again, but I did not wear the ceremonial gloves. Small gestures mattered at moments like this. I walked through the station corridor slowly, and I noticed that every species representative I passed stepped aside to let me go first. 12 years of being the developing species, 3 days of silence from the Thranic. The station had already begun to understand. The chamber was full when I arrived. Every seat, every alcove, even species that had not bothered attending the new Meridian session were present now. The Thranic alcove was empty. Ambassador Vesk had fled back to his homeworld 2 days ago, and now his homeworld no longer answered his calls. Quester Ixil stood at the head of the chamber. His pale robe seemed duller than before. His staff trembled slightly in his hand. He was looking at me before I had even reached my alcove. So was every other representative. I did not take my seat. I walked past it and went directly to the central podium. It was a place reserved for arbiters and chief speakers under Concordat protocol. I had no right to stand there. No one stopped me. No one said a word. I placed my hands on the podium. I looked around the chamber. I took my time. The Terran Confederation, I said, withdraws from the Galactic Concordat. Effective immediately. We are no longer bound by its treaties. We are no longer bound by its arbitration. We are no longer bound by its protections. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification. The chamber erupted, shouting in 12 languages. Ixil hammered his staff on the floor. Representatives stood and waved their limbs. The Corvex merchants shouted about their trade contracts. Valerie Elder demanded that I be removed from the podium. I waited. I did not speak. I simply stood there with my hands on the podium, and I let them shout themselves out. It took almost 10 minutes. When the chamber was quiet again, I continued. For 12 years, I said, humanity has been called the developing species. For 12 years, we have accepted that label. For 12 years, we have smiled and bowed and apologized. For 12 years, we have allowed you to believe the version of us that you found convenient. We are here today to correct the record. I raised one hand. The hollow screen at the center of the chamber came to life. Earth's fleet had transmitted the footage directly to my personal channel, and I had cleared it for public display. The chamber watched in silence as the footage played. General Carter's fleet appearing in the Thranic home system. The Thranic defense grid attempting to lock on and failing again and again. Because our ships were moving in formations their sensors had never been designed to track the precision of the operation. No civilian structures touched, no cities damaged. Only military assets, only weapons that had threatened our colonies, only the platforms that had launched the new Meridian raid. I let the footage run to its end. Surrender of the Thranic government, the signing of terms, the release of the 18,000 colonists, all of them alive, all of them on their way home. When the hollow screen went dark, I spoke again. For 12 years, I said, you believed that humanity lacked the technology, the organization, and the will to defend itself. You were wrong on all three counts. We have had this capability for 9 years. We chose not to use it. We chose patience. We chose diplomacy. We chose to give the Concordat the chance to be what it claimed to be. Concordat has made its choice clear. So have we. Quester Ixil raised his staff. His voice was shaking. Ambassador Harper, he said, this is an act of war. No, I said, it is an act of correction. War would look different if the Concordat wishes to see what war looks like. We can arrange a demonstration. The chamber was very, very quiet. I continued. Earth has 4 demands. First, full reparations for the new Meridian colony, payable by the Concordat treasury, not by the Thranic, who have nothing left to pay with. Second, the immediate return of all human captives held anywhere in Concordat space from any species under any legal category. Third, the complete abolition of Article 19 and every other protocol that classifies any species as a developing power. Fourth, formal recognition of Earth as a Tier 1 power with equal standing and equal vote in all Concordat matters. I paused. You have 30 days to respond. The clock begins now. Ixil was trying to speak. I raised my voice just slightly for the first time in the session. I'm not finished, I said. The chamber froze. Understand one thing clearly, I said. We did not enjoy this. We did not want this. We spent 12 years trying to be the species you wanted us to be. That species is gone. You will not see her again. The species you are looking at now is the one we actually are. Remember her. Remember what she looks like. Because every decision you make from this moment forward will be weighed against the question of whether you wish to meet her again under different circumstances. I stepped back from the podium. I walked slowly back to my alcove. I gathered my folder. I did not sit down. "I will be in my quarters," I said, awaiting the Concordat's response. I walked out of the chamber. Behind me, I heard no sound at all, not a single voice, not a single movement. 43 species, representatives, and not one of them was willing to be the first to speak. In the corridor, my communicator chimed. A message from General Carter. "Elena, well done. Come home when this is finished. There are people here who want to thank you in person." I smiled for the first time in 3 days. Small smile. A tired smile, but a real one. I walked back to my quarters. I took off the formal robes. I poured myself a small glass of water. I sat by the window and I watched the stars. Somewhere out there, in 43 capital cities, 43 governments were receiving the footage. 43 leaders were calling emergency sessions. 43 species were reconsidering everything they thought they knew about the youngest member of the Concordat. The 30 days had begun. The first week of the 30 days was the strangest I've ever lived through. I expected threats. I expected denunciations. I expected at minimum a formal coalition statement condemning Earth's actions. None of those things happened. Instead, there was silence. Vast, uncomfortable silence that spread through the Concordat like a slow tide. No species wanted to be the first to speak. No government wanted to commit to a position before it understood which way the wind was blowing. The Valerie elders, who normally issued a statement within hours of any major event, said nothing at all for 4 full days. Corvex Merchant Council, which never stopped talking, closed its public channels entirely. The small and middle powers watched the large powers. The large powers watched each other. And everyone, every single one of them, was watching Earth. On the second day, General Carter made his first demonstration. He did not attack anyone. He did not threaten anyone. He simply moved a human fleet into the Corvex home system and had it take a slow, leisurely orbit around the outer planets. 12 ships. They did not respond to hails. They did not broadcast demands. They simply existed, visible on every sensor, unbothered by the Corvex defense grid that could not track them properly. The Corvex merchant princes, who controlled the largest trade empire, the Concordat, had a collective breakdown within 6 hours of the fleet's arrival. 3 separate merchant princes had contacted my office through back channels, asking if there was anything they could do to encourage a peaceful resolution. Within 12 hours, the Corvex government had issued a public statement calling for the Concordat to accept all 4 of Earth's demands without delay. By the end of the second day, the human fleet left Corvex orbit as quietly as it had arrived. It had not fired a single shot. It had not even charged its weapons. It had simply been there, and that had been enough. On the 4th day, a second demonstration. This one was smaller but far more shocking. A single human science vessel entered the Valerie home system, approached the great monument of the founders, which was the most sacred orbital structure in their culture, took a series of high-resolution photographs, and left before the Valerie defense fleet could even reach intercept range. Earth released the photographs publicly the next morning with a simple caption that read, "We were here. We chose not to stay. The Valerie elders understood the message. Immediately, it was not a threat of violence, it was something far more precise. It was a statement of capability. Humanity could go anywhere. In Concordat space, humanity could reach anything, including the most protected and sacred places, and humanity was choosing at this moment to be polite. About it, the implication was clear. That politeness was a choice. It could be withdrawn. By the end of the first week, 3 things had happened that no one in Concordat history had ever seen. First, 7 of the smaller species had privately reached out to my office, asking whether Earth would consider forming an alternative alliance outside the Concordat framework. They were the species who had been pushed around for generations by the inner circle. And GT snorts. And GT, the species whose concerns had been dismissed, whose colonies had been raided, whose representatives had been seated in the back alcoves. Arkin Varen of the Drenish was the first. He was followed by the Cassar, the Lumini, the Trivax, and 3 others. I told each of them the same thing. Earth would welcome honest partnership. Not tribute, not submission, partnership. Between equals, each of them accepted. Within hours. Second, the Valerie inner circle began to fracture. 3 of the 5 senior elders issued a joint statement calling for immediate compliance with Earth's demands. The other 2 elders, including Quester Ixel, held out for further negotiation. For the first time in over 1,000 years, the Valerie elders had publicly disagreed with each other. The cracks in the old order were showing. Third, and most importantly, not a single species had committed to military resistance. Not one. Several had privately discussed it. The Calfine, a large and aggressive species that had long sought to rival the Valerie, had held internal meetings about organizing a defensive coalition. But when their military leaders reviewed the footage of the Thranic campaign, and when they received the reports of the Corvax and Valerie demonstrations, they quietly dropped the idea. No one wanted to be the test case that proved whether Earth's restraint had limits. On the 8th day, however, the situation changed. A hardline faction within the Calfine government, frustrated with the lack of response from the Concordat, decided to act on its own. They assembled a coalition of their own. 12 ships from 12 hardline species, each contributing whatever they could spare. Each convinced that a show of unity would force Earth to the negotiating table. The coalition gathered near the Carnath Gate, a major slipspace junction at the edge of Concordat space, and issued a public statement demanding that Earth withdraw its ultimatum within 48 hours or face combined military action. I received the statement in my quarters. I read it 3 times, then I forwarded it to General Carter with a single question: how do you want to handle this? His response came within an hour. Quietly send 1 ship. I did not understand at first. 1 ship against 12 seemed reckless. Then I remembered who I was dealing with. General Carter had not survived 12 years of political battles in Earth's command. By being reckless, if he was sending 1 ship, it was because 1 ship was enough. I had learned to trust that calculation. The ship arrived at the Carnath Gate 20 hours later. It was a new Class 1 that Earth had never shown in public before, long, dark, and shaped in a way That did not match any human vessel the Concordat had catalogued. It took a position 300 km from the coalition fleet. It did not charge weapons. It did not raise shields. It simply sat there and waited. The coalition commander, a Calfine admiral named Veshkar, hailed the human ship. He demanded identification. He demanded mission parameters. He demanded that the ship withdraw or face consequences. The human ship responded with a single transmission, one sentence. I have the exact text because General Carter forwarded it to my office for the record. You have 1 hour to disperse. Admiral Veshkar, to his credit, did not panic. He consulted his coalition partners. He reviewed his options. He decided to call the bluff. He believed that no single ship, no matter how advanced, could engage 12 vessels at once and survive. He issued orders to his coalition to prepare for combat. He broadcast a public response to the human ship, rejecting the ultimatum. The human ship did not respond. For the next 58 minutes it simply existed. It did not move. It did not transmit. It gave no indication of what it intended to do. At the 59th minute, it moved. I will not describe what happened next in military detail because the Earth Defense Forces have classified the specifics of the weapon systems involved. What I can tell you from the public record is this: the engagement lasted 11 seconds. At the end of those 11 seconds, the coalition fleet was no longer a threat. Not one ship was lost in the sense that crews were harmed. The human vessel had employed a precision disabling technique that left every hostile ship dead in the water, drifting without power, without propulsion, and without weapons, but with full life support intact. Every crew member on every ship was alive. Every ship was a total loss. Admiral Veshkar sent an immediate surrender transmission. The human ship accepted it, provided coordinates for a rescue operation, and left the area before the coalition's home governments even realized what had happened. The news reached the Concordat within 3 hours. 12 species had sent ships. 12 species had committed to military resistance. 12 species had just lost their entire contribution in 11 seconds to a single human vessel that did not appear in any Concordat catalog. 3 of those 12 species requested peace talks with Earth by the end of the day. 4 more followed the next morning. By the 10th day, every species that had participated in the coalition had formally disavowed the action, apologized to Earth, and requested bilateral negotiations to clarify their status under the new arrangement. The Concordat, as a unified body, had effectively ceased to exist. It still held its sessions, it still passed its resolutions, but no one pretended anymore that those resolutions mattered. On the 15th day, Quester Ixel requested a private meeting with me. I granted it. He came to my quarters alone. He was an old creature, even by Valery standards, and the last 2 weeks had aged him. Further, his pale robes looked gray in the dim light of my sitting room. He refused tea. He refused to sit. He stood in front of me with his staff in both hands, and he spoke in the formal old dialect of his people. Ambassador Harper, he said, I wish to understand something before the Concordat makes its final response. I believe I am owed this as one who has served the order for 400 years. You are not owed anything, Quester, I said, but I will answer. What do you wish to understand? He looked at me for a long time. His eyes were tired. They were also, I realized, afraid, not of me personally, of something larger. When did your species decide, he asked, to do this? When was the plan made? When was the decision taken to deceive us for 12 years? I considered the question carefully. It was an important one, and I wanted to give him an honest answer. There was no plan, Quester, I said. That is what your kind has never understood about us. We did not deceive you. We hoped, for 12 years we hoped, that the Concordat would become what it claimed to be. We hoped that patience would be rewarded. We hoped that our willingness to listen, to learn, to defer would be met halfway. It was not. And the fleet, the weapons, the ships that defeated the Thranic in hours, those were not built by a species that was hoping. Those were built by a species that hoped and also prepared, I said. Because our history has taught us that hope without preparation is suicide. We built what we needed to build. We told ourselves that we would never use it. Many of us believed that. I believed that until 3 weeks ago. And now the preparation is being used because the hope ran out. He nodded slowly. He looked at the floor of my quarters for a long time. When he looked up, there was something in his eyes I had not seen in any Valerie before. It was not respect exactly. It was closer to grief. The Concordat will accept your terms, he said, all four in full. There will be no further resistance. The formal acceptance will be transmitted on the 30th day as you demanded. I am glad to hear it, I said. I do not say this as a threat, Ambassador. I say it as an observation of one who has watched empires rise and fall. Your species has just taken a seat at the table, a real seat, the largest seat. You will hold that seat for a long time. I hope you hold it wisely. We will try, I said. He bowed. It was a deep bow, the old kind, the one Valerie reserved for recognized peers. It was the first time in 12 years that any Valerie elder had bowed to me in that manner. I returned it, equally deep, because he had earned it. He left. I sat in my quarters for a long time after he was gone. I thought about his question. When had we decided to do this? When had the plan been made? I thought about 18,000 colonists on a quiet world called New Meridian. I thought about a message at 3:00 in the morning. I thought about a mirror and a woman who did not recognize herself. There had been no plan. There had only been a breaking point, and the galaxy had built it for us, one polite insult at a time, over 12 long years. The final 15 days passed in a kind of blur. The formal acceptance of Earth's demands was transmitted on the 30th day as Ixo had promised. It arrived at my office at exactly 1200 hours, signed by every remaining member of the Concordat Council. Every demand met in full, every condition satisfied, no counteroffers, no delay. I read the document 3 times. I signed it. I transmitted my acceptance to Earth. I sat in my chair for a long time afterward alone, and I did not feel victorious. I felt tired, deeply, permanently tired, like a person who has just finished a race she had not wanted to run, against opponents who had forced her to run it. The Concordat did not survive the aftermath. Within 3 months of the formal acceptance, it had fractured into 3 separate organizations. The first was a rump Concordat held together by the Valerie inner circle, and a handful of loyalists who refused to adapt. It became a smaller, quieter body focused on internal matters among its remaining members. The second was a new trade association, organized by the Corvex merchants, which focused entirely on commerce and had no political authority. The third was something new, something that had not existed before, something that I would come to play a central role in building. It was called the Orion Accords. It was born 3 months after the 30th day in a quiet conference on a neutral station, what had been Middle Power territory. The founding members were Earth, the Drenish, the Kessar, the Lumini, the Trivex, and 6 other species who had reached out to us during the 30 days. None of them were inner circle powers. All of them were species that had been pushed around by the old order. All of them wanted something different. The founding charter of the Orion Accords was 37 pages long. I wrote most of the first draft myself during the final week of the 30 days while I was still in my quarters waiting for the Concordat's response. I had a lot of time to think, I thought, about what had gone wrong with the Concordat. I thought about what should replace it. I thought about what humanity owed to the species that had reached out to us in our hour of anger. The first article of the Orion Accord stated that every member species held equal standing, equal vote, and equal responsibility. No developing categories, no tiered citizenship, no back alcoves. Every species at the table was at the table as an equal, regardless of how long they had possessed slipstream technology, regardless of their population, regardless of their economic output. The second article stated that member species retained full sovereignty over their own territory and internal affairs. No species could be compelled by the Accords to make concessions on matters of internal governance. The Accords existed to coordinate external policy, not to dictate internal policy. The third article stated that membership was voluntary and that any species could leave the Accords at any time without penalty, without sanction, and without pressure. The only condition of leaving was the repayment of specific cooperative investments that had been made jointly during the period of membership. The fourth article was the one that changed the galaxy. It stated that any attack on any member species would be treated as an attack on all member species and would be met with the combined response of all member military forces. It was a mutual defense clause. The Concordat had never had one. The Concordat had preferred to let its members be picked off individually while the inner circle stayed safe. The Orion Accords would not allow that. The founding conference took 4 days. There was almost no disagreement. Every species in the room had been picked on, rated, dismissed, or ignored by the old order. Every species in the room understood what it meant to finally have a seat at a table where they would actually be heard. The charter was signed on the 4th evening. The signing ceremony was simple, no long speeches, no elaborate ceremonies. Each ambassador signed in turn, and then we shared a meal together, each species bringing food from its home world. I remember that meal very clearly. The Drenish brought a kind of sweet grain dish. The Lumini brought a cold soup made from ocean plants. The Kessar brought nothing at all, because their species did not eat in public, but they sent their ambassador with a small ceremonial flask of colored water, which was their equivalent of bringing a dish. Earth contributed bread and wine. At my suggestion, simple things that had been shared at human tables for thousands of years. We ate together, we talked about our worlds, we told stories about our species. For the first time in my career, I was at a diplomatic gathering where no one was pretending, everyone was just themselves. It was the most honest evening I had spent in 12 years of public service. The Orion Accords grew quickly. Within a year, we had 38 member species. Within 2 years, 112. Most of the species who joined were former Concordat members who had grown tired of the rump body. Some were species who had never been part of the Concordat at all, species from the outer rim and the unexplored corridors, species who had been watching from a distance for generations and who finally saw a galactic organization they wanted to be part of. The Rump Concordat was offered membership in the Accords under the same equal terms as everyone else. They refused. The Valyrii Inner Circle could not accept equal standing with species they had considered subordinate for centuries. That was their right. We did not pressure them, we did not sanction them, we simply built our new body and invited them to join when they were ready. Most of them never were. The Valyrii retreated into a quiet isolation, occupied with their own ancient matters. Their role in galactic affairs diminished year by year until they became essentially a historical curiosity. The Threnic, I should mention, were handled separately after the campaign. In their home system, Earth did not occupy them. We did not annex their worlds. We did not install a puppet government. We took a different approach. We dissolved the Threnic military, permanently placed their industry under Accord supervision for 15 years, and offered them a path to membership in the Accords if they could demonstrate reformed behavior. It was a harsh arrangement, but a fair one. The Threnic accepted. 10 years later, they were a changed species, not fully reformed, not yet, but changed. Their raider culture was gone, their government was stable, their economy was rebuilding along peaceful lines. They had not yet been accepted into the Accords, but the path was still open to them. I believed, and I still believe, that they would eventually walk it. 2 years passed. I was called home to Earth. There was a ceremony which I had asked to be kept small, but which grew large anyway because of political pressure I could not prevent. The President of Earth gave a speech. General Carter, now retired, gave a shorter and better one. I gave the shortest speech of all. I said that I had done what any diplomat would have done if she had been pushed to the same breaking point. I said that the real credit belonged to the colonists of New Meridian who had not asked to become the turning point of galactic history, and who deserved to be remembered as the reason we had finally stopped pretending. I sat down to applause I did not fully deserve, and I tried to hide the fact that I was crying. After the ceremony, General Carter and I had dinner at a small restaurant in Geneva. He was older now, and he walked with a cane, but his mind was as sharp as it had ever been. We ate slowly. We talked about old times. At one point he looked at me across the table and asked the question I had been waiting to hear for 2 years. "Do you ever regret it, Elena?" he asked. "That call you made, the one that started all of it?" I thought about it carefully. I had thought about it many times in the 2 years since. I had considered every angle. I had weighed every consequence. I regret only one thing, I said. I regret that I waited 12 years to make it. He nodded slowly. He had expected that answer. We would not have moved without you. You know, he said, the fleet was ready. 9 years ago, the plans were ready. Authorizations were in place, but no one on the military side would have taken the first step without a clear signal. From the diplomatic side, we needed to know that the diplomats had genuinely, completely, irreversibly reached the end of the road. You gave us that signal. No one else could have. I know, I said. The nations of Earth are not easy to unite, Elena, but you united them. Not with speeches, not with arguments, with one phone call at 3:00 in the morning, from a corridor on a Valeri station, in a voice that left no room for debate. I did what the moment required. You did, he said, and you will do it again if it is ever required again. That snorts is why history will remember you. I did not know what to say to that. I changed the subject. We talked about his grandchildren. We talked about the wine. It was a good evening. I returned to the Orion Accords. I served as Earth's chief ambassador for another 6 years, and then I retired. I am writing this account now in my 72nd year from a small house on the coast of what used to be California. The ocean is very blue today. My garden needs work. My grandchildren will visit on the weekend. The galaxy, for the first time in most of my lifetime, is quiet in the way that peaceful things are quiet. I want to end with one last thought, because it is the one I hope readers will carry with them. Diplomacy is a beautiful thing. It is one of the great achievements of intelligent species. It is the art of resolving differences without causing harm, of building bridges where walls once stood, of finding common ground between beings who may have almost nothing in common. I spent my career believing in it. I still believe in it. But diplomacy only works when both sides agree that it works. The moment one side treats diplomacy as a cage for the other, it stops being diplomacy. It becomes a slow method of control dressed up in polite language. The victim is told to be patient. The victim is told to be understanding. The victim is told that good behavior will eventually be rewarded, and while the victim is being patient and understanding and well-behaved, the cage slowly closes. Humanity learned that lesson the way in a quiet chamber on a Valeri station on a morning when a message arrived at 3:00 in the morning about a colony called New Meridian. We learned that we had been in a cage for 12 years. We learned that the cage was not going to open on its own, and we learned that the only way to leave the cage was to show the jailers that we had never actually been locked in. The lock had been a story we told ourselves at their request, because they had convinced us that it was the polite thing to do. The galaxy learned the same lesson from us shortly afterward. Most species took the lesson gracefully, some did not. Those that did not are mostly irrelevant now, not because we punished them, but because the rest of us moved on and built something better. I do not tell this story to celebrate what humanity did. There is nothing to celebrate about the necessity of force, even force as restrained as ours. I tell this story because I want the species that come after us, both human and otherwise, to understand something important. Patience is a virtue, but patience has a limit, and when that limit is reached, the only honorable response is to act clearly, quickly, and without apology. Not with cruelty, not with vengeance, not with the aim of domination, but with the clarity of a being who has finally understood that some situations cannot be talked through, only walked through. We walked through ours, we built something better on the other side. I hope those who come after us never have to walk through one of their own, but if they do, I hope they remember that the waiting is the hard part, the walking, once the waiting is finished, turns out to be the simpler thing. The sun is setting over the ocean now. The sky is turning orange and pink. My grandchildren will be here tomorrow. I should go inside and prepare the house. This is the end of my account. My name is Elena Harper. I served my species for 34 years. I made one hard call at 3:00 in the morning on a Valeri station, and that call changed the galaxy. I do not regret it. I only regret that I waited so long to make it. May the next generation do better. May they never have to.